This week on the Wheelhouse, we went back. Trump rides a red wave, and we're reacting. For Connecticut Public, I'm Frankie Graziano. This is the Wheelhouse, the show that connects politics to the people. We got your weekly dose of politics in Connecticut and beyond right here. Yesterday was Election Day, and earlier this morning, the Associated Press declared that Republican candidate Donald Trump has won the election and will be the 47th president of the United States.
So I want to thank the American people for the extraordinary honor of being elected your 47th president and your 45th president. This will truly be the golden age of America. That's what we have to have. This is a magnificent victory for the American people that will allow us to make America great again.
He's excited. Republicans have also taken the Senate majority with wins in Ohio and West Virginia. Connecticut's still pretty blue. Senator Chris Murphy has been reelected. Jahana Hayes, Jim Himes, Joe Courtney, Rosa DeLauro, and John Larson all have their seats in the U.S. House. To reflect on a historic presidential election, I'm joined by Mark Pazniokas, Connecticut Mirror's Capitol Bureau Chief.
Good morning.
Good morning to you as well. Susan Raff, Chief Political Reporter for WFSB.
Good morning.
So happy to see you. Bilal Siku, Associate Professor of Politics and Government at the University of Hartford. Right to my right.
Go Hawks.
Good morning. Go Hawks. That's a muted Go Hawks this morning. Hey, thank you guys so much for being here today. I know you all worked late, so thank you so much. I appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. You can join the conversation if you'd like today. Please call 888-720-9677. We were live last night on election night at 7 o'clock, and we're live again this morning at 9 a.m. because we want to give you space to react. So give us a call, 720-9677. Bilal, you get the first question. Donald Trump, heading to the office as the 47th president of the United States. Your reactions, and were you surprised by the results?
Not surprised, only in the sense that, this race has been a toss-up for some time. And so, when people would ask me who did I think was going to win this thing, I would really say I didn't know who would win the election. But I must say, the way in which he did win and the red wave that seems to have occurred, I think came as a shock, not only to me, but I think many other observers of the election. And so, tremendous victory, obviously, for him and a tremendous comeback for him. I guess we'll get into some conversation about what this may mean for our country in terms of, reelecting and sending him back to the White House, given all of the things that have happened, especially just in the last several weeks with the campaigns.
Susan, the map looked much more like 2016 than it did 2020 for the former president.
It did in many ways. Connecticut called it early, I think, with Kamala Harris came in very early, which was not a surprise, I think. And I agree with Bilal. I think a lot of people across the country, this was a very close race. I did speak to a lot of people at the polls, many of them Democrats, but there were some Republicans who were changing their vote because of some of the things that had happened and some of the things that Trump had said over the past couple of weeks. But I don't think that was enough to change the dynamics of the outcome.
Pass.
Big Republican win nationally is going to be very problematic for Republicans in Connecticut. That was the case with his victory in 2016. It was followed by huge Democratic gains in the Connecticut General Assembly in 2018. So that's part of our conversation, I think, this morning is what is the status of the Republican Party in Connecticut? What do they build around? They failed to win the one competitive U.S. House race in the 5th District, losing to Jahana Hayes. The Democrats picked up seats in the State House of Representatives. It's unclear what's happening in the Senate. But again, another Donald Trump term is going to be very difficult for Republicans in this state.
Stay tuned to the show because you're going to hear from the Congresswoman and you're going to hear from Senator Chris Murphy as well. We do have both of them calling into the show this morning. For Jahana Hayes, the last few years, it's been tough to get legislation through, even when there was the bipartisan gun measure that we saw that broke a deadlock of 30 years or something like that on guns. So Paz, now it seems like there's going to be a tougher situation for U.S. senators and Chris Murphy to get legislation through. Obviously, it still could be like that in the U.S. House, but I'm just thinking about what's coming down the pike. If you have confirmations that might be troubling for many Americans, like, I don't know, maybe if we see a Robert F. Kennedy Jr. or something like that in some kind of big role, that's going to be tough for Democratic senators to push back against, I would imagine.
Yeah, the question will be, again, I think we'll see another debate over whether the Senate rules on filibusters should change. If depending on what other seats flip or don't flip, there is still some up in the air. The Republican majority could be a little bit stronger, but if it's not, it'll be interesting to see the role of moderates.
Susan Collins, you're saying?
Susan
Something
Collins
like
and Murkowski from
Lisa
Alaska.
Murkowski,
Yeah. So Murphy has been very partisan in his first two terms, but in his second term, he also fashioned himself as something of a bipartisan deal maker on an immigration bill that ultimately failed, done in part by Donald Trump's urging of Republicans in Congress not to take it up. But the gun bill that you mentioned. So the question is, will Murphy find a path to play that kind of constructive role? It's going to take some while for all this to settle out.
I think part of the support for Murphy certainly came from his bipartisan efforts to get gun legislation. You talked to voters. That was very clear. As for the 5th District, that's such a hotly contested race.
It's good that you guys are mentioning Senator Chris Murphy because he's on the phone and he joins us right now. Senator Chris Murphy, thank you for calling into the Wheelhouse this morning.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for having me.
I want to say congratulations on your victory, and I'm sure you were excited about that, but now you have a change in your chamber and at the top of the ticket here nationally, so I would imagine that might have muted your enthusiasm a little bit.
Well, yes and no. I mean, the bottom line is that I'm so grateful to have this job. I love every day being able to represent Connecticut in the United States Senate, and I have been able to find ways to reach out across the aisle and bring Republicans and Democrats together over the past few years, and that is likely going to still be necessary in the upcoming Congress. So, yes, there's some bittersweet aspect of last night, given what has happened at the federal level, but I don't take for granted this responsibility to represent Connecticut, and whether there's a Republican or Democrat in the White House, my job is to do what the people of Connecticut need, try to bring money back to the state, try to grow jobs here, and I'll be hard at work at that in my third term. So I'm just really thankful to the people for giving me a chance to stay in this role.
And it certainly appears that you were very happy last night. We got to see it with some visuals that just popped across the screen, taken by our wonderful visuals team. So again, congratulations on your victory over Matt Corey, the Republican in the race. We have Mark Pazniokis here, Susan Raff, and Bilal Siku, and they were just talking. I had asked them about the road ahead for you because now you have potentially maybe something like 54 or 55 Republicans in the Senate. We're wondering about Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins, what kind of role they might have as moderate Republicans. So, just give us the forecast of how you approach the chamber now, Senator Murphy, as you try to get some of your measures through.
Well, I mean, part of it depends on, how Republicans approach governing in the Senate. Right now it still does require 60 votes to get things done. We'll see Republicans move to change those rules. That will have a lot to do with whether we need to, be doing a lot of cross-party cooperation, and I tend to be one of the people who Republicans look to when they're trying to get deals done with Democrats. I think the real question is, how Trump is going to govern. I don't think I was overstating my worry and the country's worry about his threats to essentially set aside the Constitution when he becomes president. And so I think, we are going to have to watch very carefully to see if Trump does what he says he's prepared to do, to use the Department of Justice and the military to try to persecute his political opponents. So I hope that we are not going to be living in a dystopian environment in which the president is trying to regularly quell dissent in this country, but we are going to have to sort of see. This may not be a normal political environment any longer in which we're debating and working on legislation. We may be confronting a president who is regularly trying to assume and exercise powers outside of what is normally the presidency is normally bounded by. So, obviously we're going to be in a little bit of a wait and see mode to see how dangerous a second Trump presidency is.
I think the term that we use in a situation like this is a mandate, and it seems like there's the U.S. Senate chamber will be red. You have a president here who's going to be a Republican, and potentially the House as well. We know the situation of the courts nationally. So just help me with all that. You said potentially a dystopia. Just help us with the vibes and how other lawmakers, Democratic lawmakers, are feeling right now in D.C., including yourself.
Well, we'll see what their agenda is. I mean, obviously, Connecticut came out in big numbers yesterday to vote against Donald Trump, to vote for Kamala Harris. So if their agenda is a repeal of the Affordable Care Act, stripping insurance from thousands of Connecticut residents, if their agenda is a restriction on women's health care, if their agenda is another big tax cut for corporations and very little, maybe nothing for middle class and working class families, well, then, my mandate is to fight that agenda. So, there's no doubt that Donald Trump looks like he did very well across the country, but he did not do well in Connecticut. So, I'll work with him when I think that there's, something to be done for Connecticut that's constructive. But most of this agenda is an agenda that Connecticut deeply opposes. So I have a feeling I'll be doing most of my work in opposition to some of the policies that'll be really hurtful to the state.
Senator Mark Pasniokis, how do you think the Senate will respond at the prospect of a sitting president being potentially sentenced to prison? I mean, one of the things, the federal investigations, I think we can assume are going to quickly screech to a halt. But he is a convicted felon in the state of New York, and he is facing sentencing that conceivably could expose him to prison time.
Well, I mean, that's really a matter for the judicial branch. I don't know that the Senate has a role to play when it comes to a court case against Donald Trump, whether that's at the federal level or at the state level. And of course, this is one of the things we're worried about, is Donald Trump, either ignoring the orders of state courts, taking actions to try to, use either the Department of Justice or even perhaps the military to stop the enforcement of state court actions. But I, don't think that there's any formal role for the United States Senate to play in judicial proceedings against the President of the United States or, any other American citizen.
Senator Murphy, good morning. It's Susan Ralph. I had a couple of questions. One, do you think that in any way we may see something similar to January 6th again? And you mentioned the courts. There is concern with two justices retiring in the near future. And the changes that could be coming, certainly for reproductive rights. And those are long-term decisions. How concerned are you about that?
Well, I imagine that the vice president is going to speak later today, and I don't have any window into what she's going to say. But if Donald Trump, is indeed the winner of the election and Kamala Harris recognizes that, then there's not going to be any January 6th. Democrats have made it clear from the beginning that if Republicans win elections fair and square, that we're going to respect those results. It's only Republicans that we're setting up the prospect of ignoring a Democratic result or potentially engaging in violent action to try to overthrow that result. So, no, if Donald Trump has won this election, then we're going to have a peaceful transition of power. Certainly, the Supreme Court is, lined up against Connecticut interests right now. And if a couple of the conservative judges, step down, then it doesn't necessarily change the composition of that court, but it is a very pro-corporate, very anti-woman majority right now that is going to continue to make rulings that are really dangerous for Connecticut. Of course, I worry in particular about some of the rulings that may come down on the Second Amendment. They may be moving to an interpretation of the Second Amendment that essentially takes away from the state legislature here in Connecticut the ability to, keep our gun laws safer than the rest of the country. But time will tell. This
is the last question for me, Senator Murphy, and it has to do with the gun laws. We have survivors of gun violence on the show next week. We have the mother of Ben Wheeler, who you are intimately familiar with, coming on the show next week to talk about gun policy. Ben Wheeler was killed at Sandy Hook Elementary School. So we talked about earlier the push to try to get legislation through, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. I know that's something that you're very proud regarding, that you were able to break that gun deadlock. So just help me understand the strategy of trying to get through gun legislation now in this new Congress, particularly with so many survivors looking to you, Senator Murphy, to try to get that done.
Yeah, well, I'm very proud of that bill, because it's resulted in a lot of lives being saved. I'm here in our home in Hartford right now, and, gun murders are down 50% this year in Hartford. Across the country, urban gun violence is down 20%. Mass shootings this year, about 20% fewer than last year. That's not good enough, but there are thousands of young men and women who are alive today because of that bill that we passed. We passed that bill with Democrats in charge of the Senate and the House, and Joe Biden in the White House. We were not able to get any bipartisan work done on guns when Donald Trump was in office. He was not interested in doing anything that would cross the gun lobby, and I think that will be likely the case in the next 4 years. That doesn't mean that I won't stay at it. I had many conversations with President Trump in the first 4 years trying to convince him to do something. I just couldn't get him to break from the NRA. So I walk into this next 4 years skeptical that Trump will be interested in anything that'll make our kids safer. I think he's shown, unfortunately, that he's mostly interested in padding the pockets of the gun industry. But of course, every single day I wake up thinking about, the Wheelers and those families in Sandy Hook, thinking about the families here in Hartford, and I will not rest. I will continue to look for unlikely partnerships, and hopefully there's something there in the next 2 years.
Senator Murphy, I rained on your parade a little bit here today, but nonetheless, I look forward to some more hopeful days where you and I will maybe meet up at the Torrington Burger King. I know that's your stop when you go to around on your 80-mile walk across Connecticut, and I'm from Torrington, and my brother actually used to work there, so maybe we'll see you there one day.
Well, that actually is my election day superstition. So I don't think I've stopped there on my annual walk across Connecticut. But
the election day superstition. There you go.
I was there yesterday, and it's that stop has never done me wrong. Having had the fortune of winning a few elections here in Connecticut, and it was not the healthiest meal yesterday, but some of us can't shake those election day superstitions.
Take care, Senator Murphy. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, guys.
Senator Murphy called in. Thank you so much to him. And Susan and Mark got to ask him some questions. I like that. Did you get what you wanted to hear, or maybe you got a story cooking up for either the Mirror or WFSB? Go ahead. Foreshadow a little bit.
No, it was just
Pray tell.
I thought the fact that the president-elect is facing a criminal sentencing needed to be thrown out there, and I wanted to hear Senator Murphy's reaction to that. I mean, obviously, I don't think anybody expects there to be any talk of an impeachment effort before the inauguration, particularly given the makeup of the Senate and potentially the House.
I think there's a lot of concern, and I also think, because I sat down with Senator Murphy a few weeks ago, this has not been a session where there's been a lot of movement on legislation, and we could see even less now with some of the, tensions and drama that's been going on in Congress between Republicans and Democrats. And so, I think that a lot of people would like to see things come out of this session, but I'm not sure that's going to happen.
Yeah, I'm not confident. Well, a lot depends on the House, right? If Republicans gain control of the House, then they're able to, I think, more effectively move their agenda. But the problem is if Democrats, gain control of the House, then I think that makes it difficult. I think the senator probably is being kind. I really, view that a dystopian kind of scenario will actually play out if Republicans are at all interested in their Project 2025 and moving a lot of that agenda. It really calls for dismantling of various, cabinet level sort of departments. It reorganization of government in a way that I think many Democrats will be very uncomfortable with and will push back. So I imagine what Senator Murphy and other Democrats will probably find themselves doing is playing defense a lot, trying to block efforts, using the filibuster and various other parliamentary procedures to try to obstruct an agenda that will be quite radical to a lot of Americans if they actually follow through. I think, if they go forward with like mass forced deportation, how that plays out, I mean, that will likely cost billions, if not trillions of dollars, will require a huge increase in the number of government workers who will need to go out. I think, the idea of schools being raided and children being placed in, detention camps, I think that will be hard to stomach for a lot of Americans if something like that actually gets carried through. And where will you shift money from other priorities in order to put money into that? I think the wall comes back as another issue.
The reality is different today.
Yeah,
I think we
exactly.
talked about this before the show, that the reality is different today because we've seen one administration, and now you're talking about essentially that mandate that we always talk about in politics, where you have the chambers and the courts as well.
And I think in many ways, this vote was quite a mandate. I mean, this is he has come back from the forest, the oblivion, right? We thought this was it. It was over. It was so much that was there that
I
it
don't
was
think he ever
impossible
really
anyone
went
could
away,
come back.
though.
Yeah, but the idea that he'd be able to come back and all of the baggage this time around, and he won, and he not only won, he won decisively. I mean, he can actually win all 7 battleground states. Nobody predicted anything like that.
And I think a lot of people right now are on pins and needles. They just don't know exactly what's going to be next.
We're going to dig into this deeper because we got to talk about why things shook out the way they do. There's a lot of theories. There's a lot of finger pointing as well. We'll get into that in a little bit. I want to make sure, though, that we give you space to react. So do give us calls today because we want to make sure that we get you on the air. If you're feeling morose, maybe you're happy. Maybe you want to dunk in a Democrat's face or something like that. Give us a call, 888-720-9677, 888-720-9677. When we come back, we're going to hear from a congresswoman. This is the Wheelhouse from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. Election 2024 is in the books. So what do we know at this point? And what can we expect to learn in the days and weeks ahead? That's what we're diving into in this hour. I guess we know a lot more than we thought we were going to know. While there are no crystal balls, I guess the magic wall has spoken, so to speak, and maybe the blue walls crumbled a bit. I got something better to help us out here, a powerhouse panel. That'll make us feel better. I'm doing the Ultimate Warrior press slam for all of those watching on YouTube. Joined by Mark Pazniokas, Connecticut's Mayor's Capitol Bureau Chief Political Reporter at WFSB, Susan Raff, and Dr. Bilal Sekou, Associate Professor of Politics and Government at University of Hartford. Give us a call. We do want you to join the conversation, 888-720-9677. You have agency. You have the power. Give us a call today, 888-720-9677. Well, last night, Susan was there. Jahana Hayes was declared the victor in her face-off against Republican challenger George Logan. We have Congresswoman Hayes on the phone right now. Congresswoman Hayes, thanks so much for calling in today.
Good morning, Frankie.
You sound happy this morning a little bit.
I'm faking it.
Well, I know that you were up until at least 2 o'clock in the morning last night, right?
Yes, even later than that.
How did it go? Did you expect it to end as decisively as it did? I guess much earlier than this year. And can you give us any insight, or then, 2 years ago, and can you give us kind of any insight to any kind of conversation you might have had with George Logan?
Well, as I told you before, we had collected the numbers at every single polling location. So we were entering the numbers into our own spreadsheet, and we knew that I had a pretty clear margin over George Logan. But the numbers were coming in slow. There were a couple things that we hadn't expected, and that was, the high turnout, the same day in-person registration. We had, I think, almost 1,000 people in New Britain. In Danbury, they were still voting almost up till 11 o'clock. They said there were 10 more people in line. So I thought we'd have the results earlier, with early voting. And so we were waiting, but there was a sense of, I don't want to say confidence, but clarity, because we did see the numbers coming in. And it was interesting. I went just to say goodnight to everyone because, we had a party. We were going to have a party anyway, just because our supporters and volunteers have worked so hard. And we were going to have a party no matter how it turned out. And as soon as everyone left, I go back to my room and I see that the AP called the race, and literally I'm by myself. I just saw the headline. And I didn't expect George Logan to call me last night, but he did. I mean, it was after 2 o'clock when he called me. I figured we'd have a conversation in the morning after the results were official, because I know there's still some places in the district that are counting. But by last count, even with the unofficial results, I'm about 20,000 votes ahead. So he did call me last night. And it was a very short conversation. He said, this is George Logan. I'm calling to congratulate you on your victory, on a hard-fought victory, I think he said. And I just said thank you. And I told him, if he chooses to stay in the 5th District and ever needs anything or help with the federal agency, just to reach out to me. I'm here.
We're all laughing. You can't see us right now, Congresswoman, but we're laughing. You're making us have some fun this morning.
But I think that says something that he did call at 2 o'clock in the morning. And Congresswoman Hayes, it's Susan
and how
Raff.
Gracious Congresswoman Hayes was. It sounds like on the other line.
I too, I think, got home a little after 2 and then saw that the race had been called. And there were some signs along the way, with Logan, that some of the money for his ads had pulled out. He didn't have an event last night, which was very unusual. But I think, Congresswoman Hayes, you really felt that you couldn't take things for granted, but you felt confident last night even before the race was called.
Well, I think that this was this was the most strategic campaign that I've ever run. We had volunteers everywhere. We were determined to own the ground, to knock as many doors as we could, to have a clear message. I think that was one of the things when I reflected after the last race. I let him define himself and just assume that people would do their own research, and I'd present my issues, he would present his, and that would be it. But this time I had to push back and dig a little deeper and say that's actually, there's a voting record that doesn't support what he's saying. And I think one of the challenges, I think what it came down to is not even about the top of the ticket. I think the problem for Mr. Logan was people started to question his credibility because too often either he wouldn't say something or when he did say something, it was a little different than his voting record. And I think I made a conscious effort to define my work and try to define this race.
Congresswoman Hayes, this is Bilal Sekou. I have a question for you. Given, the results at the top of the ticket last night, and I know you probably had great expectations about what governing with Kamala Harris could have looked like for you and the historic nature of her campaign. I'm just curious about your reaction to what happened, which really came as a surprise, I think, to many people who were observing the campaign. And, how did you sort of take in what happened last night?
Well, I mean, obviously I'm heartbroken by it. I had great expectations for this entire country. I haven't really, it was a late night and an early morning, so I haven't really looked into, I haven't had the opportunity to sit down and kind of listen to the news or see how it played out, what groups, just all of the numbers, the crosstabs and everything. But, I mean, we worked. We just continue to work. I know it's going to be even harder. I worry about some of the things I care deeply about, healthcare, the Affordable Care Act. We have a farm bill that's going to run out of money in a couple weeks, and school meals and nutrition services are in that bill. And it's something that's been on the chopping block for years that I've really tried to push back hard on. But today I wake up and, like I said, my heart is broken, but my resolve is firm. The work is way too important. And the people in this district showed up and said, we trust you to do this work. So, I asked for this job. Now I have to do it.
Reproductive rights. That was such an important issue that we had heard about. We had the opportunity to ask Senator Chris Murphy about that earlier. Now that you've heard the news about Kamala Harris and what there may be intentions from the Trump administration, the next Trump administration, what can you do to protect reproductive rights? What can you at least tell the people out there who very much care about that issue?
Well, I think everything right now hinges on the House, how that where the House falls. There's so many races that are still not called.
Do you know anything about that in this regard? Are you hearing anything that you could tell us about on if this could break the way of the Democrats?
No, we have a caucus meeting later,
Gotcha.
But if a lot of places, just like Connecticut, they stopped counting last night. They'll finish today, so it's going to be probably a couple days before we hear about some of these races. But again, what we've heard from Trump is just a mixture of positions on this issue. I'm not going to institute a national ban. I don't support. I'm the one who did away with Roe versus Wade. So right now, we are in uncharted territory, and I fear that we're probably going to see the worst of that. I don't know what's going to happen with that. One of the things that I said when I was campaigning is who is in charge determines even the bills that are placed on the floor, if we even have the right to vote on this. And I know that is something that people care deeply about. And I can't reconcile with the fact that so many Americans, knowing what was at stake and what this means, voted in the way that they did. But I guess we'll see over the next 2 years how this plays out. And the next chance that we have at federal elections, in the midterms, and people will I guess, we have to live with the results of this election and just work really hard. Work really hard.
Congresswoman Hayes, it's been a pleasure to talk to you, especially on probably running on very light sleep. So we appreciate you talking to us. And once again, congratulations on your victory in the 5th District.
Thank you. Thank you. I can tell you 20,000 feels a lot more better than 2.
You mentioned that last night. You said you wanted to make sure that we wouldn't keep saying a difference of only 2,000 votes. So congratulations.
Absolutely. So now you can say at least 20,000.
It's great to talk to you, Congresswoman, and look forward to talking to you about that farm bill because I know you're working hard on it, and that's what we want to keep focusing on. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Have a great day, guys.
You as well.
Just one little bit of context. If your listeners were wondering why we burst out laughing, it's because even in victory, Johanna Hayes is not letting go the fact that George Logan is from outside the 5th District.
Yes.
Yeah, that's why I'm glad that you buttoned that up.
If he stays in the district, I'll be happy to work with him. Yes, that was something that she tweaked him on throughout her campaign. She was far more aggressive this campaign. In any event,
he never was really clear about it anyway. And in fact, I think he put in one information, no response for address. His campaign said they didn't want a specific address because of concerns about security. But yes, that was an underlying theme for that campaign, or certainly for Johanna Hayes, who wanted to highlight he does not live in the district.
It's the bright spot of the Wheelhouse having politicians on in the last few weeks because we've gotten to talk to Congresswoman Hayes twice, and she's got a great personality. Hey, just want to take a couple of callers before we go to our next break. I think we got Levi from West Hartford on the phone. Levi, we want to talk to you. What do you got here?
I'm wondering how much of a role anti-Semitism in the progressive wing of the Democratic Party sort of did them in this year. I mean, when Kamala Harris was picking running mates, everyone was talking about Josh Shapiro, but then the progressive wing started calling him Genocide Josh. There were no similar epithets applied to Tim Walz, even though he had roughly the same positions regarding the war in Gaza. And then you had these rallies where the front windows of Jewish businesses were burst in and Jewish kids couldn't go to school on college campuses. And I don't think that the progressive wing or the Democratic Party would have given this same legitimacy if, say, someone who didn't like the Chinese Communist Party started targeting Chinese Americans. It would have just been called out as baseless, racist, fear-mongering, hate-mongering. It would have been excoriated, whereas at the DNC and at various rallies, people have always made a point of saying, oh, well, the protesters, they have a point, they have a legitimate voice. They wouldn't have tolerated this for any other ethnic group.
Levi, thank you so much for the phone call this morning. We appreciate that you gave us a call, particularly after such a charged election. Hey, Susan, you mentioned when we did the Wheelhouse Live that you were going to be following this issue, how campuses handled this, how local police, law enforcement, and now this is something that it seems like Levi is bringing up here that many people cared about, anti-Semitism.
Well, I think there's no question that the Jewish community has been torn apart by what we're experiencing over the past year. And there were some promises, I think, made by the Trump campaign to be very pro-Israel. And Levi, do you think that there were a lot of people in Connecticut, Jewish people, who were swayed by that, who felt that they should support
Levi's
Trump?
not on anymore. Yeah.
Sorry about that. I wonder if that, that's part of it.
Yeah. We continue to have folks come on. This is an issue where you could also express sadness for what happened in Israel with the surprise attack, but you can also see the pictures that we see every day in Gaza. So it's one of those things where I think like it could be a both situation. But Levi's feeling what a lot of people are.
Sure,
and that's
people
why
are very disappointed with the Biden administration. They want the hostages home. That still has not happened. But there's no doubt the Jewish community is torn apart by what's happened, and if Jewish people have learned anything from past experience, it's really been the carnage of their own people. So to witness what we're seeing now is almost, unconscionable for some people. But I think, Trump and a lot of Republicans have been very pro-Israel. I think we heard Matt Corey talk about that as well.
Pro-Israel, but they also do spread some of that rhetoric, though, that we hear regarding anti-Semitism. We do see that a lot from the right.
Yes, we do. And in fact, if you see Senator Bob Duff, who put out a very controversial video on X about comparing Trump to Hitler. So there is a lot of that in what's happening, especially on social media.
Bilal.
Yeah, for me, I think what will be interesting is once we actually get some real concrete data on who showed up, who voted for the Democrats, who voted for Kamala Harris, who voted against Kamala Harris, who voted for Trump. I think it will provide some clarity about these kinds of issues. I mean, my general sense, I think, for me, people are going to do a lot of, backseat, driving and trying to figure out, what exactly happened with this thing, with this election. And I just think, it's a complex set of issues. For me, a particularly important part of this sort of story of 2024, in my mind at least, is that I also view it as a kind of repudiation of about a 60-year experiment with rights expansion that has occurred in our country. You go back to 64 with the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act in 65. Then, of course, Hart-Celler, which changed the quota system for immigration, and that had an impact on our society. And there have been a lot of people who have resisted that change that has propelled us forward. And I think in many ways, a key question for this election was, are we going to be going forward a multiracial democracy, a democracy in which we embrace all people? And I think there is a lot of people in our society who reject that idea of an inclusive and multiracial democracy. And
this
I think
feels like
that's on play. That was at play at this election.
This feels like Reconstruction to you a little bit.
It feels like 1877 all over again. To me, this 2024 is like 1877, where people have really said that this 60-year second Reconstruction has come to an end, just as 1877 was the first Reconstruction came to year. And there's been a response, a strong response to these changes in our society.
I don't think there is any way to look at the Trump mandate in those battleground states as a rebuke of anti-Semitism in the United States. Anti-Semitism is real. I don't believe these results reflect that. If this had been a very close race, we would be looking right now at what the Arab vote in Michigan was because of the anger over the inability or the unwillingness of the Biden administration to stop the massive civilian casualties in Gaza. But these numbers were so big, the battleground states, it was such a, it was so one-sided that analysis I don't think we'll hear much about.
And I think it begs the question what Donald Trump will do when it comes to the U.S. involvement in world conflicts, whether it's, in Gaza, whether it's Ukraine. What role will the United States play going forward?
Another quick call here. Nick from Vernon, go.
Hello?
Yeah, Nick, you're on the line. Welcome to the Wheelhouse. Thank you for calling us this morning.
Good morning. Happy Wednesday. One word I want to convey to you is shock. How can this happen? So I'm a Democrat. Right? One question I want to ask you all there is, the Democratic Party, with all the technology, with all the experts, with all the people, how can they not know what the Latino, the black voters think? How can they not know? Send some people in bars, in markets, in whatever, and just talk to people, like undercover, whatever, and you will see what people think. How can this happen? Oh, we're enthusiastic, and the candidate Kamala lost with hundreds of thousands of votes in Pennsylvania. It's such a huge, and she lost, and Trump actually gained votes from the black and from the Latino community. So how can this happen with all these experts? Second comment I would like to make is this.
Yes, quick.
I'm a Democrat, right? I'm a Democrat, work full time. My wife works full time. We pay $1,500 a month daycare. We're broke. So the Democrats need to make the economy work for the common people, regular people. Okay, if it doesn't work, people will go for the perceived tough guy.
Nick, thank you so much. I'm so sorry about your shock. I want to give you a big radio hug here. I'm sorry too that he's paying that much for daycare and he's going through that situation. That's what a lot of people are feeling right now, that crunch of the economy. We got to go to a break in a second. So guys, just your quick reactions to Nick, because we want to we want to give Nick some agency here that he shared his feelings. So let's help validate those, I guess.
Yeah, I guess for me, while certainly I think a lot of the post-election commentary will be about the role that Black and Latino voters played, especially Black and Latino males. To me, I've always felt from the very beginning that this election for Kamala Harris to win, she needed the support of white women. And I think at the end of the day, that decision, and we still don't know enough
because
about
the finger
exit
pointing
polls.
is coming to Black men, it's coming to Latino men as well. But you could point the finger elsewhere.
It's something that happens quite a bit. And at the end of the day, since 1964, the Democrats have not been able to win a majority of the white vote, and white women have voted Republican as well as white men. And in fact, probably about 70% of white men voted for Donald Trump this time around. The percentage of white women who voted for Trump between 2016 and 2020 jumped from 52 to about 55%. It's yet to be determined what those numbers will look like now. But I think part of what the Democrats were hoping is that white women, for example, would look at reproductive rights and some other issues and that they would make a different decision. And my sense is that that did not occur.
I think the biggest challenge was that she needed more white men. And did not get that. And we see time and time again, especially in this election cycle, that there are a lot of white men across the country who are angry and
let's pick this back
left
up.
out.
Let's pick this back up after the break. We're going to take a quick break. You're listening to The Wheelhouse. This is The Wheelhouse for Connecticut Public. I'm Frankie Graziano. The results are in on the 2024 presidential election. Former President Donald Trump will take office once again, but many decisions came out of the polls last night. Beyond the presidency, access to reproductive care was on the ballot in some states, as well as access to absentee voting right here in Connecticut. Lots to unfurl this morning. Here to help me do this, Mark Pazniokis, Susan Raff, and Dr. Bilal Sekou. Only about a few minutes left. Just want to understand that there were some wins for abortion rights advocates over the course of the night. Missouri positioned to be the first state where a vote will undo a ban on abortion at all stages of pregnancy with an amendment that would allow lawmakers to restrict abortions only past the point of a fetus viability, usually considered after 21 weeks, although there's no exact defined time frame. What do we know about how reproductive rights fared across the country last night?
I think it's very up in the air. I think for Connecticut residents, we've codified it into the state constitution that protects a woman's rights to choose. But be honest, I think a lot of people are concerned about one of the things that I recently learned as doctors here in Connecticut have told me that young women, even in Connecticut, have opted for sterilization. And that's something that a lot of people don't know. And I asked about that, and the doctor told me it's because simply that women are so concerned that their rights are going to be taken away and they won't be able to have a child, that they're opting for sterilization. It's a sad reality.
We've seen an effort, at least publicly, from national Republicans to soften their stance on reproductive rights in response to people caring so passionately about the issue, Bilal. But it seems like we thought reproductive rights were maybe higher on the poll, but maybe not as strong as people caring about the economy. And there's just issues, I guess, in this country, as we could tell by the results, with men just not supporting women as much as they should.
I mean, obviously, polling may come out of this with a huge black eye because they just didn't predict well this election. But certainly one of the surprising things about some of the exit interviews was that threats to democracy, for example, was at the top in terms of voters' concerns. But in many ways, these issues are not clearly separate. I mean, threat to democracy and rights, freedoms could also be connected to reproductive rights. So what would be interesting, and I'd love to hear Susan's thoughts about this, I imagine, even though Donald Trump has said he's not interested in signing the bill that would, have a national ban on abortion rights, I can't imagine Mike Johnson, if they gain control of the House and they have control of the Senate, will not put that kind of a bill on his desk.
So many issues. It's hard to say what influence MAGA Republicans will have on his decisions.
It's an important topic. We really want to get to reproductive rights. We only have about a minute left in the show, so let me get some final thoughts from you guys, starting with Bilal Siku.
Really crazy night, but my final thought is that on this coming Monday, Frankie will be visiting the University of Hartford's campus. He'll be participating on a post-election panel discussion with myself and Professor Gilda Aliota, and look forward to having you there on Monday at 12:45 in the Shaw Center at UHart's campus.
This is proof that I would do anything for Bilal Siku. Mark Pazniokas.
My question is, will the Democrats repeat the exercise that the Republicans did in 2012, which was to do a deep postmortem as to what the results meant? The Democrats have some real soul-searching to do about the results in those battleground states, and I think there's a lot they need to learn to prepare for the next presidential election.
Susan Raff, you get to put the bow on the show.
Okay, a jaw-dropping moment for me, and it's not in the big scheme of things, but, Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro won. She's the veteran congresswoman. Michael Massey, who challenged her, a convicted felon, spent 11 years in prison for armed robbery, got over 40% of the Republican vote.
And we had Michael Massey on the show, and he had mixed results from Bilal Siku.
That's
and
incredible, though. I was a little bit surprised by that.
But
thank you so much. Stay tuned. We are out of time, unfortunately, for this week's edition of the Wheelhouse. Please stay tuned for next week. We told you about that interview we have with Francine Wheeler coming up next week. More information is available on our website about the charity that she has with her son. Thank you so much to Chloe Wynn, Robin Doyen-Aiken, Meg Dalton, and so much more. Dylan Reyes. Thank you for listening to The Wheelhouse. We'll see you next week.